just casual, and had an informal kind of talk about some of the issues that the television show This Is Us has raised, or that the show is exploring. How many of you have seen the show? Okay, so a good number of you have. And it's not essential, but really we're using the popularity, the issues raised. And this is Sarah, everyone. We're using kind of the popularity of the show and the issues raised to just be able to have a discussion about some of them. And so why don't we start by introducing, if all of you can just go, maybe go, Annie, if we can start with you, and just introduce yourselves and just say kind of what your role is, who you are in this constellation.
Hi, my name is Amy Jacobs. I am a birth parent. I have an he's 8 tomorrow, who I have an open adoption with.
Hi, I'm Max. I'm an adoptee. I was relinquished at 4 days old, I think we decided. And I've been in contact with my birth mother for 11 years.
So I'm Danielle, and I'm a foster adoptive mom and a transracial adoptive parent.
Okay, you can actually hold on a second.
My name is Sarah Katoka, and I was adopted from Korea when I was 3 months old. My older brother was also adopted from Korea, and my little brother is my parents' biological child.
Hello, my name is Antoinette, and I am a very foster adoptive parent.
I'm Shemin Busy. I'm all over the coalition's patron. I am an adoptive mom, and I'm also a support group leader on Long Island.
That's right, both, and Antoinette is as well. So, okay, well, why don't we start with one of the themes from the show, which I think is relevant to some of the discussions that have happened here at the conference. In the show, we have what is basically a closed adoption, with some exceptions, in that the adoptive mother in this case knows who the biological father is and kind of keeps that to herself for some time. And it's ultimately revealed in a roundabout way. But any of you want to comment on thoughts around open adoption versus closed adoption, you know, what your experience has been, you know, children you've worked with or whatnot, just around closed or open adoption and the merits of each.
My situation is a semi-open adoption where I have to send letters and pictures every year. Since I joined support groups, met people like Danielle over the years, Claudia, my girlfriends, his birth mother chose to have a closed or semi-open, whatever, no contact at all. At first I was okay with it, and then when I started to go through this journey over the last 10 years, I cannot express to you how my mind has opened so much to the fact that we don't have contact with her. It's kind of making me sad. It is her choice. That is her choice in this, but the education that I've been getting over the last 10 years has been amazing to teach me that hopefully one day that I can help him connect with her when he's ready, or if like we just had something in the last session, that maybe when he is of an age where he feels he wants to connect with her, I'm ready for it. I've been ready for it for a few years. So I just, you know, that's my situation.
I'm an adoptive parent of 3 boys. My oldest boy is 33 years old, and the youngest one is 22. None of my adoptions were open adoptions. However, when I adopted my oldest son, because I knew there were other siblings, I did ask for information where I just think that the children need to stay connected. So I asked for information about the parents who had the other children, about how they could be in contact. And I did subsequently reunite the children as adults, because when he was younger, he told me no. When he got older, he agreed to do it. So we did it. With the 2 younger boys, it was a little different situation, because even though it was a closed adoption, during the time that I was fostering the children, I did have an opportunity to meet the family, parents, and the grandparents, and the sisters. But the adoption itself was closed. I'm not opposed to open adoption, I just didn't have any formal or legal agreement to it. But I do think that in this day and age, it's important that parents be open to, not necessarily, if it's not a legal kind of thing, to be open to the fact that someday these kids are gonna reach out. Because my boys did reach out on Facebook and found family members. So if you're not receptive to it, it can be quite a shock. And it can be quite hurtful if you're not open to the fact that they're gonna do it. And it has nothing to do with you personally. So, you know, like, what was the Q-tip thing, was that it? About not taking it personal.
Right, taking it personal.
Yes.
So, as I mentioned, I have had a open adoption with my son since he was born. I was at his baptism, I was at his first birthday. The first year, I think we had 4 visits. This past, okay. So when he was like 4, we would see each other about once a month. You know, I was a part of their extended family, and they always treated me as such. They actually moved from New York City, where I live, to Hong Kong about 3 years ago. Work took them overseas, and they, as part of the agreement with the company that he got a job with, they listed me as a part of their immediate family. So I'm actually flown out there once a year for a visit and stay with them. And then they come back and see us. And just to tell a little story, my son is 8. He has always known who I was. He was adopted by a gay couple, so I am the only mother in his life. And in some ways, I think that has also made it very important to him. Like, we used to celebrate every Mother's Day together and things like that. But his family has always been, his extended family took a little bit to warm up to me, but has always been very receptive of my place in his life. All of his family calls me his mother. Nobody uses any qualifiers in his family. He's never heard an adoption qualifier for me or my family. We're just treated as part of his immediate family. And I think that that's allowed him to figure out who he is on his terms. So he just had his first communion close to Easter, and my parents, my sister and brother-in-law, and myself went to it, as well as his whole extended family. There were like 150 people at this first communion. And he could like run around and be like, oh, you know, I've got dance moves like these guys do. Or and he could take parts of his personality or parts of who he was from all these different people that he was related to in different ways. And it always allowed him that sort of forming his identity. And that's why I think open adoption is so important. And coming back to This Is Us, where you have Randall, who was in a transracial adoption, where he didn't look like the rest of his family and where he was trying to make those ties, I think not having that connection made it that much harder to sort of figure out where he fit into with everybody else.
Yes, and so let's talk about transracial adoption. It's a central theme of the show. Black man adopted into or adopted in a white family, and kind of some of the struggles of that. Anyone on the panel, Danielle, since you've got the mic, Antoinette, anyone want to comment on that, how that plays out perhaps in your life?
So we are a transracial family. My husband and I are white. We have white birth children. We have adopted kids of all different colors in varying degrees. So for our house, it's ever present, and we live in a very mixed community, which I think impacts us really positively, because my kids don't have to go very far to find people and things that are culturally appropriate for them. But at the same time, you know, we go places and people are like, are they all yours? And I'm like, no, I actually collected up other people's children on the way to the store. So really people asking like, where's their real mom? Which I think if there wasn't the transracial component to it, might not be a question that comes up. And then when I say smart things like Hempstead, because they want you to say something like exotic, and it's not exotic, it's like the hood. then they go, oh, and I'm like, I am his real mom. Do you mean his birth mom? And then I'll say like, well, that's sort of none of your business. They get very like taken back, but I think with transracial, people just assume they have the right to know things that are really none of their business.
Yeah, I know my son said, it's like every time we were out in public, there was a question that he felt compelled to answer, even if it wasn't asked. Yeah, yeah. Others want to comment on that? Transracial adoption? Shemaine, come on out of your shell.
It's me and you. It's me and you, right?
You're in trouble.
No, I've had, my husband and I live in a very, very white community. The nickname for West Islip has been White Islip as we were growing up. We haven't had a lot of problems because in Isaac Moore schooling is because the fact that he's in a special ed class, so he's in a bubble. So it's almost protected him a little bit. But when we're on the outside and we're going through a mall, and I heard it this weekend, the triangle, the you,
Yeah.
oh my God. I didn't think at first, when we brought him home at 3 days old, that we were gonna have so many eyeballs on us. But I found that by the 4th day old, I became like a lion, the advocator came out immediately, knowing that I'm gonna get this a lot more than I thought I was gonna get. There was a scene in one of the seasons, I can't remember exactly what season it was, where Randall and his dad were sitting on the sidewalk, and they had that moment where he says, I'm different. I don't think it like really kind of solidified in our home. I'm looking at my husband who's bursting into tears, because I burst into tears, and they're looking like they're about to burst into tears, because it was real. He was talking to him, and he made it like what you keep saying, it's their norm. You do look different, but it doesn't matter. So that was a really great scene in the show that hit home tremendously for us. So.
I'm not a trans, my children, my adopted children are ethnically the same as I am, but I do foster children, for Hispanic children, and I get the reaction when I go out to the stores or something, they're calling me grandma, or I go in the store and they'll say, the kids are standing here and I'm here, where's your parent? And I say, here I am, and then they get the confused look, and then they walk away. But it's kind of funny sometimes, because they don't know what to say, and they just walk away. I don't get the strange questions, but I get the strange looks. So, but yeah, you do get the looks in the store. I don't get a lot of people who will say anything. I don't know if because I look mean and they did not. But I don't get the questions.
Yeah, I kind of like using it as an opportunity to kind of screw with people, because I think, early on in my life, like it was always, so my last name is Gatoka, and I don't know if you've seen it printed anywhere, but it's really confusing to people for some reason. But it's Polish, so like my whole life, like people were always like trying to like figure me out. Like European people that knew it was Polish would look at me and be like, then like the white suburban people would like try and make it sound Japanese. They'd like, oh, Gotoka. But so like I've always, and I think like when I was younger, it really made me nervous because I was a really shy person. But as I got older, I just like these questions, like I started using it as a way to empower myself. So now when people are like, oh, Gotoka. They expect me to, expect me to explain myself, like I owe them something. I was like, yeah, it's Polish. and then that's it. But yeah.
Thank you for sharing that. That was bringing some humor into the situation. In the show, Randall, who is the adopted individual in the show, is what we might say is a type A personality, or a real kind of a super achiever. And in my watching the show, I've had to wonder how much of that is just who Randall is, his personality, and how much of that might be a response to the circumstances that he has grown up in and the realities of his life. Do any of you want to comment on that?
So it's interesting for me, and I was just talking to someone about this. So our two youngest adopted kids are 9 and 4. and they're the children of children that we had in foster care. So for all intents and purposes, our grandchildren, but don't ever say that. And it's interesting because they have very different personalities, and clearly we know trauma comes into it and all these other things. But because I have the blessing of knowing their parents, and in both instances, their grandparents, some of it I can really equate some of their behavior to just like, no, that's who they are. Like, I know their mom had that personality. I know that you might equate it to trauma, but no, like, that's it. That's who they are. I don't know, but I know in my situation, it's given me pause to go, well, she's, very passive, and that could be a really negative, traumatic sort of base thing, and it could just be her mom was super passive, and that's genetically it is, and my 4-year-old is like wild and aggressive and all these other things, which very well could be his trauma stuff, but hey, if you met his mom, you'd know, maybe not so much. So I don't know, but it's interesting because that's sort of, a lot of adopted parents don't have that ability to go, maybe it's just who they are. We're always sort of looking for the answer of, is this traumatic? Is it a diagnosis? Is it something? And maybe it's just who they are.
Okay. Another thing that's brought up in the show, and it has to do with the character of William, is substance abuse and the role that it plays in children not being able to be with their parents and kind of the cascading effects of that. Anyone want to comment on how substance abuse is played out in terms of the children that you've parented, either through foster care or adoption? Any concerns around it? Just thoughts around that issue and how we deal with it in our system.
I'm sorry that it's me
Okay,
again.
you two, you both gotta come out of your shell.
Right,
Yeah.
sorry. But it's interesting because you were talking about your open adoption, and we have open adoptions, and we've typically only taken teenagers, so not that I was less concerned about their relationships with their birth parents, but it was more me standing back, just making sure that they were safe, but I couldn't stop it or prevent it, even if their parents were really in a bad place. I just needed to make sure they were safe, but stopping that relationship was not really in my control. But now that I have little ones, that I have a lot more management of that relationship, for me, it's always when you were talking, I think about Randall's mom, his adoptive mom in this situation, and how she really thought she was protecting him, and that's why she didn't tell him, and all those sort of things. And I always walk that fine line of both of my kids' parents are actively using in various ways. I want them to have a relationship. We talk about them. We have photos of them around the house. But I'm really hesitant to let the relationship happen because it's really unhealthy. But then I have guilt about that, and these sort of polarizing feelings of I know it's right, I want them to have a relationship, but would I let them have a relationship with a drug addict on the corner? Probably not. Would I expose them to some of those things that person might bring in that relationship? So sort of tempering those two things is always sort of something I'm pulled on both sides with.
I think one of the issues that I dealt with children and kids who have come from homes of substance abuse is having them acknowledge or deal with that. Because a lot of times the children don't want to, they want to build this fantasy idea about who their parents are and why they're in care, and have them understand their real truth without demeaning or insulting or putting them in a position where you're putting them down. It's a delicate balance, because if it's something they don't want to accept, then anything you say may be perceived as negative. But it is something, particularly when it's a long-term relationship and you're going to adopt or you have adopted, they need to know how they accept it, and accept it in their own time is something that you have to allow to happen. But they need to know. It's just that you have to be careful about how you present that information, and it cannot ever be in a negative way.
I don't have a lot of
Okay.
experience, so we're good.
Another issue in the show that I think is, and I'm really glad to see that they're exploring this, because it has resonance for me in my family situation, is the relationship between siblings. Now, the construct in this show, for those who don't know it, is not real, and I'm just going to put it out there. The construct is that a woman, Rebecca, is pregnant with triplets, goes to the hospital to deliver, and one of the triplets is, I think, stillborn, or dies very soon thereafter. I can't remember which, but basically, one of the 3 children that she has been carrying dies, and Randall is a baby that has been brought in, left at a firehouse, and brought into the hospital at the same day. And so the missing triplet is replaced with Randall, who goes home with this couple. Okay, for those who have not adopted, it does not work that way. So, but I think the idea is it's kind of a, kind of an abbreviated way to kind of represent the kind of the struggle that we have, and also a way to explore how these 3 kids who are born, on or about the same date, raised together, their interplay. And anyone want to comment on relationships between siblings? In this case, between bio siblings and adopted siblings, or relationships between siblings in general.
All right, so I got this one.
I
So
saw you, Mike.
I've got an adopted little brother who I was raised with, and then our adopted parents had a biological daughter with the test tubes and the science. And then I also got a relationship with my biological siblings after reuniting with my mom. So I got a lot going on. Growing up, little brother was only 2 years younger than me, so we was close. Hung out a lot. I had a pretty good relationship for years, but we had a lot of emotional neglect in my family, and we all manifested it in different ways. And we had each other's back through a lot of it, but we really kind of fell apart from each other over the years because none of the trauma ever got dealt with, and it's like an infection. It just festers and gets worse. So at this point, I pretty much don't have a relationship with my adopted brother or sister. A very strained relationship with my parents. And it sucks because we used to be pretty close. I remember my little sister being born, and me and my little brother saying all right, we gotta help raise her. We gotta make sure, and she ends up tough enough to take care of herself and not let no one boss her around and none of that stuff. And it worked. She's a hard-ass kid. She's a tough one. And but my brother, he saw that and he got mad at it. He's like, well, yeah, she gives me shit all the time. It's like, yeah, bro, that was the goal there. And so we got a real screwed up relationship where, we really shouldn't be mad at each other about it, but I had to cut them out because they were so toxic. They think I'm crazy because I'm the only one who addresses the issues facing our family. So it's a challenge. It's definitely a challenge. But never the issue of adoption was the wedge between us or anything. It was always the fact that we weren't raised to handle our emotions well, so we're just pretty much all a bunch of assholes. But not mince words. But
This is on Facebook Live, just so you know.
do they have a
No, I don't know.
Facebook gonna sue me?
Just so you know, it's
We're
like,
gonna get
It's Zuckerberg in my shorts.
Sorry.
no, it's fine.
But I will say, our adopted parents, they were always good about the fact that we always let us know we were adopted. It was never a secret, and they always made it clear that we were all equal. Maybe all bottom of the barrel, but we were all equal.
Sarah, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I was gonna kind of agree with you, Max, that just a reminder, my older brother was adopted from Korea. I was adopted and my parents had my little brother. And I would say, that the discrepancies between us have nothing to do with the fact that we're adopted. It's because we're all just kind of really, really different people. But I just wanted to tell this kind of funny story. So I will say that I am going fishing with my brothers tomorrow, so I do think that even though there are a lot of differences between us for a lot of reasons, mostly political beliefs, I think that, for myself, I think I realized that I was the only one that was willing to deal with the emotional issues in our family, and I was the only one that was willing to extend myself to reach out and make that relationship solid. My brothers will never come to an art opening with me. They're never gonna go see a documentary with me, but I'll go shoot guns with them if they want, But yeah, so just a little funny story is, so my older brother is Korean, my little brother is white, and they live together with a wiener dog. So like, yeah, we never actually talked about like any deep issues except this one Thanksgiving, we had a bonfire together. And you know, we were all drinking and things were getting kind of loosey-goosey. And my older brother asked my little brother like, hey man, how did it feel, you know, like growing up with two adopted brothers and sisters? And like, you know, I was like, whoa, this is going deep. And my little brother was like, I don't know. It is kind of weird how everybody thinks we're a gay couple, though. That was like it.
I don't know if I can top that, but I have a similar anecdote about this. I was raised with my younger aunt and uncle. So in our family constellation, I play the role of oldest brother. And it occurred to me, because we've been going through some stuff recently with my step-grandmother, their mother. And it occurred to me that in some ways, and I think watching the show made me aware of this, I've wondered, like, how did this impact my younger uncle, who would have been the oldest in the family, but then there I was. And so, and Jeremy, he really is my brother. In my heart, he's my brother. He's so wonderful and brilliant. He's an astrophysicist, I swear to God. So he's like, his mind is way up there. But socially, not so much. I sent him an email because he lives in Vancouver, and this was after we'd had a video chat between him, my sister, and me about issues with my step-grandmother, their mother. And I was really trying to step out of the older brother role, acknowledging this is their mother. And my husband was listening to this conversation, and after we got done, he was like, what the hell was that? And, you know, kind of deconstructed with him, and I realized I was trying to step back, and they were still looking at me as the oldest brother, kind of like, oh, what do you want to do? What, you know, like I'm supposed to tell them. And so I emailed my brother, and I said, hey, you know, I've been thinking about this, and do you ever think how my presence has impacted you? Because you would have been the oldest. And he responds, yes, period, all the time, period. Which I think if I didn't understand him so well, I would have been like, wow, that was harsh. I think it really, you know, does kind of underscore, because we have these complexities to our relationships in some ways. Now, This Is Us this season has started to explore in a way that I think some of us may not be fully satisfied with, but foster care and the realities of foster care. And one theme that resonated for me is the relationship between, or the interplay between, foster parents and the children's parents. In this case, Deja is the child who is in foster care, placed with Randall and his wife. And Shauna, I believe it's Shauna, is the mother's name. And there is some awkwardness, some difficulty in kind of bridging what in this case is not necessarily, it's not a racial divide, because all of these individuals are African American, but I really think it does highlight the cultural divide that exists that we don't talk enough about, I think. And I didn't know if anyone wanted to comment on that, kind of how relationships can work between birth parents and adopted parents or foster parents, impediments to that, your experience.
Well,
It's really much more about class than it is about race in this case.
right, well, in my case, it was not about race at all. And this has nothing to do with me and my adopted children, because in one case, I never even met the parents. But I've had foster children in my home, and one of my most rewarding families that I had with me, I look at it as most rewarding is because somewhere towards, they were with me like 3-4 years, but after a period of time, we became to develop a good relationship to the point where when the children went home, the mother would call me for like parental advice. Tell, oh, you know, Annie's doing such and such and such. I said, put Annie on the phone. I said, Annie, didn't I tell you, don't get on time? You know, that kind of thing. We developed that kind of relationship. Those children still communicate with me to this day. And I think that it didn't start out that way, though. At first, it was a very contentious relationship. The mother and the sisters, and particularly the sisters, I don't think it was so much the mother, would come to the visits and they had complaints about everything. So, you know, we have to weather that sort of storm because, you know, when we go through our little MAP training, you know, they teach you about the stages of grief. Well, I think it's so true when you look at how they go through those stages of blaming and you're the fault, and, you know, they go through that. If you can get over that hump, particularly if the children are with you for a while, and you could come to a point where you have an agreement that our common interest is in these children, and you can move beyond your personal feelings about who I am or mine about who you are, then we can come to some kind of an understanding where we can communicate effectively. Doesn't mean we're best friends, it doesn't mean anything like that. But I was able to see those children go home and still keep a connection. Because when the parents leave and they're angry and you're angry, you don't see those children again, and that can be very painful.
So for us, for me, I think one of the biggest things that I noticed is that, especially with birth moms, sometimes I'm really threatening. Like if I have a positive relationship with their child, they don't really like me. And no matter what I do to try and be nice, that doesn't work out. And because we've taken older kids, their relationship, we just sort of monitor it, right? So sometimes we would drop them off or pick them up. And it's interesting because my husband, a lot of times, can bridge that gap easier than I can. So there'll be families, we have one young woman who lived with us for a while in particular, that sometimes she'd take the train home and then my husband on his way home from work would pick her up. If I were to go by and pick her up, like I would be like actually scared for my safety. Like this woman hated me. She would come to the door and I would think, is today the day she's gonna drag me out of my car and kill me, because she was just angry at me for like breathing. My husband could go and she would welcome him in, have a plate of food, you want a beer, like the total interaction was different. And I think because I was the other mom, that she really had a hard time with that. So it's interesting because the dynamic can be different between me and a birth family and my husband and a birth family, so.
It is interesting to show that they've kind of obviated the whole mother issue in this case because the birth mother is not present. It's been alluded to, I think, that she was an addict and died. But she's just not present. They've kind of taken away kind of that very emotional two mothers issue. And, you know, Annie, you shared in your case that you've always been identified as the mother, but your son wasn't, there isn't an adoptive mother in the picture. So interesting that you mentioned that as well. Yeah. I think that's something that we still grapple with, you know, trying to understand that kids can have more than one mother. Yeah.
I think going back to this issue of class, it's interesting because I've always gotten along really well with my son's dads, and in a lot of ways we had similar backgrounds. I actually see a lot of myself in one of his dads specifically, and because of that we could sort of have this same common ground. But there's always they have the power. They have the power and they have the money, and that's always been a part of our relationship. And so things like, you know, you all are going out to dinner and they are paying and there's no like even conversation about it, or there's no, and you're kind of like, is this okay? Do I, like, and so I just kind of, I've gotten to the point where it's like, I'm not gonna even mention it, but there is always that sort of power in class. Now my son's biological father, who he's never met and they don't have any sort of relationship, is not in the same class level and grew up very, very differently than me, and grew up very, very differently than the way Grayson is growing up. And I think about that a lot because I do feel like it's important to find a way to talk about him in a positive, like he came from a different place. You know, he grew up in like group homes in New York City, and has his own amount of baggage, and I don't want Grayson as an older child or an adult to meet this man and think less of him. And I think that that's an important, you know, understanding that different circumstances don't equate to better or worse or less than, and finding ways to talk about these different things so that the child, so that they can find common ground and have relationships as they grow older, but also so I mean, a part of them is still that person. And so if they ever see that as like under, you know, like, oh, that's not as good, then I think that they see that in themselves too. And I would never want that for my son. As difficult as my relationship with his biological father was, I feel like it's important for him to see him in a positive light in ways, not untruthfully, but to understand all of the good as well, so that he understands that in himself.
Okay, good. Now, extended family. One episode of the show focuses on a visit from the adoptive mother's mother and brings to light the grandmother's different treatment of her grandchildren and kind of stereotyping of Randall. Anyone want to comment on how your extended family is managed, you know, having adoption or foster care be part of their world? Shemane, you want to say something?
Try to put it in an order. My kids are little. I have an 8 and a 4. The 4-year-old's a biological son. The 8-year-old is transracial. So he also is delayed with special needs. So we have such a different dynamic in our house that we've had to learn in order to teach them, treat them very differently. They are very, very opposite. Their needs are very different. Their academics are very different. So I think everyone in our household started to realize over the last couple of years, now that the baby's starting to get academically surpassing the older one, that we make sure they're very individual. They do separate things a lot of times with the needs and the behaviors. So my parents are starting to realize we're gonna have to treat them just a little differently. Not in a bad way. I think it's more of, they are very individual. They're not, they need their special dates to get with grandma, grandpa, Nana, and everything. So I think they're having a problem just the same as me, since the transracial, we all are in a very white neighborhood, and I think they're starting to see the differences. And I'm glad that they've come over the last few years to my level, because it took its toll. The special needs came as pretty much as a surprise, and it's education and learning. I love the show because I feel like they're trying to show Rebecca with the siblings and learning. All right, so they're not necessarily getting it 100% right, leaving out the birth mom, but I think they're doing a good enough job for the masses to get just enough in there to start getting the emotions, start thinking, and get those wheels churning about different things and topics. So.
Oh, God. This is a very complex sort of thing to look at, because as foster adoptive parents, we deal with society's views of what we do, period. And I've heard it over in the conferences, I hear it at home in our support groups, I hear it all the time. You know, especially when we have children who are difficult, have difficult behaviors. The view that people take is give them back. They don't look at you like you're doing something that you feel is a part of your life, that these are a part of your family, that these are part, like your children. No one has ever told you to give your child back, your birth child back. No one has ever told me to give them back, give them away, or do anything like that. But they're very quick to say that when you're talking about an adoptive child or a foster child. So that's the issue we have to deal with. And it's not just, sometimes it's with family, sometimes not. Sometimes family are more apt to depend upon your family dynamics and how you were raised and how you have interacted with your family. And I know my mom had to take my nieces and nephews in as foster children, so that wasn't something she would say. But you get it with your neighbors, you get it, you know, even you've heard professional school teachers, and when you go up to the school and you have problems with the child in school, and why are you doing this, and why are you know, so you hear it a lot, and from what it's extended family, because anybody who's in the life of your child is your extended family. So that could be the teachers, your neighbors, or whoever it is. It's something that you have to stand on who you are, stand by how you are and let these people know that that's not acceptable.
Anyone else want to comment? Okay, we have like 7 minutes or so. So I want to throw it out to the audience. If you have questions or comments that you want to add, anyone?
Do they like the show? Or do they think it's not?
Well, those who have watched the show, do you like the show?
So I watched the show, and I have mixed feelings about the show. I think, kind of like what Shemin said, I think they give the watered down version that's for the masses. And I think in that sense, they do a good job. I'm really curious to see what they do with Deja next season, everybody. I really am curious because for me, that's close to my heart, older kids and managing some of those difficult behaviors and how families manage those behaviors. So I'm really curious as to how, I think certain things they've done really well. I think when Deja had to check Randall about, putting her business out there, I thought, good job. So I think certain things that have never been talked about, they do a good job talking about it. But others, I'm like, really? Like, they were foster parents in 3.2 seconds. Like, oh, we're gonna be foster parents. Ta-da, here's your child. Which I thought, let's not. Because I think the world thinks that, oh, you decide to do it. No one understands the effort and the amount of time and all of these sort of other pieces that go into, the training and all that stuff that we have to do to really do this effectively.
The only thing I liked about that is that they did show that Randall and Beth were not on the same page.
I agree.
And I think that happens. I mean, I will raise my hand in asking how many have found yourself on a different page with your spouse at some point in this journey. It happens, And I don't think we talk about that enough. And I was glad at least they got that. Although I agree with you, I thought it was like 2.7 seconds. Yeah, it was
No,
way
but I
too short.
agree. I'm glad
It
the
was
piece
right.
that, like you said, they had a conversation and they weren't thinking the same thing and sort of how that evolved, even though that conversation probably went on for weeks in real life. The fact that the conversation even existed was a real positive.
Yeah,
They were frustrated. I mean, Randall was frustrated that it was taking so long.
right, which for those who have gone through the process, that would,
But it's in the context of a
Right.
show, right? And you
Yeah.
can do so much in so much, many
Right.
episodes. And
right, so we kind of can forgive them compressing in some ways. But, yeah. Sarah, Shemin, I think you two want to comment.
I just wanted to say I hate Mandy Moore. I think she's the worst actress ever. But what I do like about the show is that I think that it's helping to redefine, or it's helping to reimagine how we define family, like how we illustrate family. And so for that, I'm grateful.
Mine's a simple comment. I like the fact that, I do like the show. I worked in the business for a very long time, so I know how the suspension of disbelief, I just kind of wish and just enjoy. If they get it right, wrong, I just enjoy it. But the one thing I like to see is that night that it's airing, you just watch your Facebook feed of all the friends and families that haven't been foster, haven't ever adopted, and they're all waiting, can't wait to cry, tissue boxes. For me, I think, you know what? They're bringing up something that no one really ever paid attention to. The masses around the United States are listening to a show about something that we're trying to get out there, what you're doing and your efforts. So, all right, they're not educated enough to get it right, but they're bringing it up. And then it's our job to kind of mold it the best way we can. But there's not been a show that's gotten it sort of close. I mean, yeah, they had to compress and speed it up a little bit, and they're getting but they're bringing it up, and it's getting that many people on board to know about this.
Right, and I think one thing that Claudia in our office said is that they don't always get the mechanics right, but they get the feels right. Right. Yeah, Lisa?
I think they hit on really important subjects, like the disconnect between the mother who's trying to protect her son by not giving the information, and then he is so angry
Right,
when he learns the relationship between them, and how difficult it was for Randall to have a relationship with his father and then it was, and then, I mean, how, it just feels like it hits a lot of points, not perfect, but it brings up a lot of things that are sort of central to adoption that probably people in the, you know, out there don't have any clue about.
Right.
Right, and I think in William and Randall's relationship, you know, the kind of dysphoria of the biological relationship and the things that you share in common as a result of that, and then the distance because you haven't grown up together. Yeah, and that kind of, that can be really difficult to bridge, yeah. John, you want to say
This is
something?
for the adoptees. Have you seen the show The Fosters?
No.
I know someone who has, and she has been looking for a really long time for someone else who has seen the show, and she's sitting right there.
So, yeah. Okay, so the two of you can talk.
It's a great show.
And that, I think, no, it's on Netflix, isn't it now? Yes, it's on Netflix.
Not the full, not the full, it stops at a certain point, but most of it, majority.
Okay, but if you haven't watched it, you can
Oh,
start
have you
there,
have plenty to
please,
go,
right?
yeah.
Mary Beth?
I just wanted to know if anybody had any thoughts more on how to navigate when it comes to finances and open adoption and paying when you go out to dinner and invitations and how to make that smooth.
So I will say, I think open adoptions inherently have this issue of you don't have examples in your life, right? Like you know how to be a parent, you know how to be a child because you see it all over the place. You know husbands and wives, whether it's relationships that are healthy or unhealthy, like you can, you know, find models in the world. And I just don't think that there's enough out there of people who are living open adoptions and are out there in a way, and that makes it really hard. And it's also hard because there is a power dynamic to ask and answer questions. Like I don't want to push boundaries that I don't know where they are, and so I don't even know when I can ask for something because I don't want, if it's a big deal, I don't want it to be made into a big deal, but maybe it's not a big deal. I remember I have a good friend who is also in an open adoption. Her son is about 2 years younger than mine, and we have very similar circumstances. And I had never had any time alone with my son. Like I would go on a visit, and like we'd hang out in their basement while his dads were upstairs. But I never like hung out with my son alone. And she had a son 2 years younger, and would be like babysitting. And I was like, oh, that's so cool. I wish, like, but I would never ask. And so I think that that's the hard thing, right? Is that you don't want to ask for things, you don't want to say things, pushing the wrong buttons, and you don't, and it takes a really long time to feel secure in that relationship. Like there are so many bad stories about adoptions closing, right? And for me, I do this because of my son. I think it's better for him, and so it's important to me. And so I'm going to fall on my sword every time. I'm going to make it more uncomfortable for me if I think it's going to make our relationship better for him. And so I think that can also be tough. So I don't think I have a good answer for you, honestly. I think that if you are the adoptive parents and you are more in the power seat, to make sure that it's clear that those people are important to you and that you are not giving up on this relationship regardless, and so that they feel security in that. And I think that pushing those conversations that might be awkward in a way so that they don't have to, because again, they're pushing up and having to like ask for things. It would be much easier for me to be like, I don't want to visit, than for me to be like, I want more visits, or for me to be like, I don't want this, than to ask for more.
Thank you.
So ours is a little different because my open adoption birth parents ask for everything in the world. And then I always have to think about, did I do enough? Am I not, should I have done that? Shouldn't I have done that? And a lot of times it's stupid. Like, I mean, my birth moms my little ones are like still kids to some degree. They're in their 20s and they have their life circumstances. It's like when they call and ask me for $20, it's like, not that we're so wealthy, but is that $20 gonna matter? But it might matter that they eat. But like, okay, when it becomes $20 every week, like, come on. So then where do I draw the line? Where do I not draw the line? So
on the flip side, I get asked for everything, and then I don't know, like, then I have guilt about, should I have done that? Should I have not done that? Should I have, you know, where's the sort of line with that?
Josette, you had a question? Okay. Other questions? Okay, well, we're at 3 o'clock. So I want to thank all of our panelists for doing this. Some of them I should add with no notice, so special thank you to them. And, yes. Okay, now be reminded of everything I have to say, because Pat's coming up that way, Claudia's saying something in my ear. We will remember everything, I think. So, 50-50. Should we do it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Grand prize is $423, it's in here.
Oh, and you get it with a neck lanyard, whoever
That's right.
wins.
So, I shook the bag up pretty good. We can shake it up some more, and then who should we have over here? What?
No pressure, Scarlett, you're responsible for someone getting $400.
Right over there.
Oh,
So I'm just looking
Okay.
at, why did my mother just call on me in front of all these people?
Just put your hand in the bag and take one out.
Okay, well, don't shake it.
Oh,
I
okay.
have to-